So I am so happy to see lots of familiar faces. I'm Teresa Mangum, and I'm a professor of gender, women's sexuality studies, and English, and the director of the Obermann Center for Advanced Studies at the University of Iowa. And we decided that our mission we're really an interdisciplinary center, is to support research. But that mission was established about 45 years ago. And since then, research has, of course, dramatically changed, and in recent years, changed all the more. And so I thought that this would be a great opportunity to spend this year inviting different configurations of researchers and supporters of research to talk about what is research now. And I'm especially interested because not only does that dictate what our center supports and many other centers, but also because I suspect that we're at a juncture where it's really going to be important to rethink the metrics of what it is we're rewarding in the name of research. So I hope that our speakers today will help us do that. I also want to say a quick thanks to the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Iowa for co-supporting this event, and to let you know that there'll be a next round table coming up later in October that you should look out for. So our guests today are in alphabetical order: Ann Basting, who's a professor of English and the incoming director, now the director, of the Center for 21st Century Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Antoinette Burton is the Maybelle, Leland, Swanlund Endowed Chair of History and Director of the Humanities Research Institute at the University of Iowa. I wish. At the University of Illinois in Champaign, Urbana. I only wish you were here, Antoinette. Javier Duran is Professor of Border Studies in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences and Director of the Confluence Center for Creative Inquiry at the University of Arizona. I want you all here, clearly. I'm so sorry. Actually, I'm not. I really do want you all here. And Sylvester Johnson is a Professor of Religion and Culture, Assistant Vice Provost for the Humanities, the founding director of the Center for the Humanities, and executive director for the Tech for Humanities Initiative at Virginia Tech University. So let me admit another round of people. And I told the panel that I would pose a few questions, but mostly I'm hoping we can just plunge in for a good conversation. But to get us started, I asked them to come up with a concrete example or two of the kinds of scholarship that defies conventional categorization in the humanities that we can use as our sort of case studies to go back to and questions as we go through our discussion for this hour. And Sylvester, would you start us off?
Absolutely, although I'm a bit disappointed that I was not also appointed to be a member of Iowa University.
Come on over.
But thank you so much. Really delighted to be here and to join the panel with such great colleagues. So yeah, this is such a terrific question. And one example that I was thinking of, you had asked about the humanities scholarship it's not a conventional, typical kind of categorization as humanities. So we just, last year we launched something called the Tech for Humanity Lab that is housed in our Humanities Center. And this is focusing on research to understand and to shape the way that digital technologies are acting on human security, and trying to understand ways of supporting human security. One of our humanities faculty here, Aaron Bransley, actually heads that effort. And he studies political science and has really fascinating background in the work on digital technology, the machines themselves, as well as human rights issues. He's worked internationally trying to support people, for example, who have become targets of very dangerous state-sponsored violence as journalists, for instance, using these technology platforms in order to target people. So he's worked to try to sustain and support those human rights. And he's leading this effort with our humanities faculty throughout our College of Liberal Arts, Human Sciences, and grad students as well to address the support for human security at a time that the implications and challenges from digital technologies have become quite immense. I think that's a really compelling example because the issue of human security, which is about human thriving and all the resources that people need to live full lives and under humane conditions, is I think a really compelling way to try to demonstrate the role that humanities can play in our world. There's no discipline called human security. That's not a department. We don't have a department of human security. We don't have a department for democracy. We don't have a department for human rights. This is a very large issue that just affects our world. And I think that people who are trained in humanities, who are doing work, scholarship that is humanities scholarship, are really well positioned to be able to lead this kind of effort. Not that it belongs to us and no one else, but that because of the kinds of issues that are commonly engaged in humanities scholarship, there are just so many opportunities to really thoughtfully and impactfully produce the important work that needs to happen around human security. So that for me is a compelling example.
This is fascinating to imagine that being discussed in a tenure and promotion case, for example. Yeah. Anne, do you want to go next?
Sure. Although now I'm wondering why we can't have a department of like here, where all department structures in schools and colleges are getting reorganized. I think that would be an energy driver. So I, as you said, I'm new, and so I'm learning all of the research that's being done. So this was actually a great exercise for me to go in, and I decided to look at a couple of the new fellows that we have, Derek Hanley and Maria Novotny. And Maria's research, it focuses on reproductive health, how reproductive health patients advocate for their healthcare needs. While the scope of her work is very broad, ranging from lived experiences of infertility to the ethics of data collection, CARE is actually the methodological framework that connects all of her work. And she currently has 2 book-length projects that she's working on. And I like that that's how it's a book-length project. One is a co-authored manuscript that expands on and defines care as a research practice and demonstrates the efficacy of a care-centered research paradigm and delivers concrete models for how to enact care methodologically. The other is a critical, creative, edited anthology of infertility patient art and writing, curated from her work with the Art of Infertility, which is a long ongoing project that she's done. Derek Hanley is working on the question of how African-American communities in the urban North respond to targeted urban renewal development from the 1950s and 60s. And it's kind of the Milwaukee collaborative partnership with Mapping Prejudice out of University of Minnesota. And he's working on that with Ann Bonds. And as I was thinking of those examples, I thought, you know what I love? What department are they in? Mm-hmm. Right? I'm not going to tell you. It like, where are they? These and then I heard I love the Song Exploder podcast, and they defined this. They described one song as genre bending, and I'm like, that's what these are. We're experiencing discipline bending, genre bending, collaborative work. Both of those faculty members are in English. So that is my example.
Yeah, those are fascinating examples too. Antoinette, I'm just going around my screen.
Sure. So I want to thank Teresa for inviting me and also proposing these very hard questions to us, which forced me to kind of narrow a little bit my often kind of messy thinking, I mean, in a good way. So I've come to prize research-based projects that use storytelling, which draws on knowledge makers beyond the walls of the academy as well as within them. And as a practice, I think this co-created storytelling can work with any topic, from Beowulf to climate change, because, to echo Anne, it's the methodology that brings the new forms of knowledge into being and consciousness of that methodological approach. And I happen to be also, in addition to director of our Humanities Research Institute, I'm the PI of Humanities Without Walls, which is a Andrew W. Mellon Foundation sprawling consortium, of which Teresa is like practically the vice president. And there are many, many examples of this kind of work in HWW, but I want to focus on one in HWW and then one at our own HRI. The HWW one is called Freshwater Lab. When I'm done talking, I'll post some links into the chat. And that's headed at UIC by Rachel Haverlock. And it's a set of evolving research-based partnerships which genuinely engage communities as knowledge makers, putting aside academic expertise and hierarchies and generating spaces for new knowledge around all the various water basins in Chicago. And I can't talk and paste at the same time, but I really urge you to click on the link because they've done some amazing work, which they represent in very compelling ways, on their website. The other project that I want to highlight is something that came out of a research cluster here at HRI called Sea Hearts, which is a project of community healing in the African-American community here in Champaign, Urbana, organized by my colleagues Ruby Mendenhall and Carla Hunter. And what I particularly appreciated was watching them unfold their community partnership, which was something to see. How they recruited and co-designed their strategies with folks in community, how they stepped away from the table and let community members actually drive the research problem, created a number of amazing public events for the community to which we were not invited, but which was really appropriately sort of inward facing, and then produced an incredible article on it in the Journal of Black Psychology. So a really important refereed journal, all in the space of like a year and a half. So really impressive work there.
Thank you, Antoinette. And Javier?
Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts. So I'm a scholar of border studies, and as a field, it was mostly driven in the 20th century by social science research. In the 80s, there were some changes, and then we have this juncture in which the work of Gloria and Saldúa becomes a remarkable example of challenging those paradigms. And then within what I would call humanities border studies, the topic of testimony, and the ways to capture, analyze, and disseminate stories and narratives for migrants and other displaced subjects that face a number of factors related to structural violence. It's in my view something that needs to be revisited. And in light of Sylvester's comment about human security and the role of communities, that's one of the things we're trying to do here at the conference center at the University of Arizona, and really try to discern this struggle between agency, subjectivity, and embodiment, and the tension that created within these communities, in these migrant subjects and the displacement. So for me, these conventional notions of testimonial or testimonial narratives seem to fail to properly capture these tensions, and hence the need to revise and how we approach this type of research and pedagogy. And specifically, our Mellon-funded Fronteridades program is aiming to reposition border communities as loci of enunciation rather than places of appropriation by reclaiming and recentering those local and regional narratives and creative expressions. So I can give I would put in the chat some examples of the work that our graduate fellows are doing out of this funding that we receive. And there are some wonderful examples of how these students are really facing these challenges.
So these are all amazing examples, and they anticipate the second question that I was going to ask you all about what kinds of humanities research seems desperately needed now. But I think it would be really fascinating and helpful to reflect on that question in relation to the examples you've just given. So for many of our colleagues, what you've just described would be utterly unrecognizable as humanities research. How do you understand it as humanities research? How would you explain the projects you've just described to a dean or a promotion committee, which seems to me related to that second question about what's needed? But how would you explain to someone this is humanities research? Anybody want to start?
I could start, I think, by saying the obvious, which is that all of these projects are collaborative, and they run up against and defy the kind of singular genius scholar model that has undergirded historically so much, not all, but, Pache, the monograph, a kind of model of humanities scholarship. And I think it seems very obvious, and yet we know that the labor, the time that it takes, and the infrastructure that it requires are all things that some humanists are, willing to do and put in the time for, but many are not. And comes back to the question of, I think, graduate training, a kind of curriculum redesign, Teresa, that you're working on at Iowa and is happening elsewhere across the country. And I think I'd love to hear my colleagues talk about the sort of resistance or friction that you feel in your own institution around that kind of collaborative work, or maybe you live in paradise and it's all just a dream. I will just say very, very quickly that at Illinois, the Provost Communication number 9, which is the document that governs tenure and promotion, is being revised to attend to, valorize, and otherwise incentivize collaborative team-based work, attention to diversity and equity issues, and public-facing scholarship. So there are institutional mechanisms that indicate maybe a new dawn for this.
We are going to all need a copy of that document when it's out, Antoinette, to share. Anybody else want to follow up on how you would explain this as humanities research, these projects?
I find myself in a funny position, which is this is the world, this deep collaborative sort of democratizing of research, as where I have been for my entire career as a scholar, and now coming back into this, I find myself hitting the walls of the institution where it's not recognizing this. So that's I'm coming at it from the other way, but I do see. I'm just going to give an example from a project that I did a while ago, where we tried to articulate some of the projects we were working on inside of this larger, huge collaborative project. And the first one was coming up with a common language across all the research partners. And that it had never been considered as an outcome or something to work on inside of a project that I was aware of or that the funders were aware of. So even articulating the establishment of a common language across non-university based and university based research collaborative is a huge step. And it's what Antoinette, what you're describing, I think, as that radical collaborative model. And I think we're redefining what outcomes are as we're doing this. We're the old building the plane, as we're flying it kind of a thing. And it takes a certain amount of creativity to articulate what some of those research outcomes are in the processes inside of this. So that's just a little tiny example of that.
No, that's really wonderful, Anne. And Javier, it looks like you're jumping in with the framework for exactly what Anne described.
I was thinking about your questions for this conversation, and this idea can keep coming up because as we also interacting with our colleagues in STEM, we see that collaboration there is a given. And therefore, how do we really just bridge some of these perceived barriers in some places, but sometimes the structural barriers, and create this multi-voice conceptual framework as problem solving. What are some of the problems we're trying to address in terms of the work we're doing? And problem solving is not necessarily a pragmatic approach, but it takes all different types of possibilities. So I think that conversation, it's in my experience, has been very useful to bridge and also educate some of the sector of the administration heavily invested and coming from STEM fields. And sometimes they are really is the first time they deal with the humanities scholars in some different capacities. So I think I found this helpful in terms of looking at the particular issue in light of what else the institution is doing. Just a thought.
Mm-hmm. And Sylvester, you're such a helpful interlocutor on this because you are someone who started out in religious history. And so you're not only working very much in a tradition of the humanities, but also an earlier period, starting off an earlier period. And I think often scholars working earlier periods can feel left out of the work focused on immediate social, cultural, issues. But you also work a lot with scientists now. So how are you helping explain what that work is and the role of the humanities in the kinds of collaborations you're part of?
That's a great question. I think a couple of things I would want to emphasize. And one is that the Center for Humanities here at Virginia Tech is articulating what we do as humanistic, human-centered. That is deliberate in trying to be encompassing instead of structuring exclusion departments inherently through some definition. I don't think we have anything to gain by doing that, even though that's debatable. But I have tried to emphasize that humanistic, human-centered for several reasons. I'll pick out one. You talked about my background in religious studies, which very much informs a lot of the work I do. I've also been a member of the faculty in African American Studies at Northwestern before coming to Virginia Tech. And one of the things I really became attuned to in African American Studies is that these disciplines that emerged during the 1960s and 70s, that aside from religious studies, so African American Studies or Black Studies, Indigenous Studies, the Latinx Studies, Women and Gender Studies or Sexuality Studies, that those are often excluded from what is sometimes described as the core humanities or the real humanities. And I don't think that's accidental. I think that's related to the larger history of excluding the peoples who have started those disciplines from the category of the human. The human tradition itself is a very problematic one. And so when it came time to launch a center at Virginia Tech, I realized there's actually a history of power and privilege that has shaped a lot of the thinking about what real humanities is. The other thing I would point out is that someone like Aristotle, who's often an icon for the real humanities, was a polymath who wrote across multiple disciplines and talked about plant biology and theology and physics and political theory. So that's one thing that I point to for an encompassing vision. With the engagement with science, I said the other thing I try to emphasize, because our center has an emphasis on technology as a human problem, is to try to make an important distinction between STEM disciplines and technology. So often we conflate those things. We treat technology as something that, that's over there in engineering and tech and science, and if humanists are trying to be involved in technology, you're surrendering the ground of studying something that's supposed to be core humanities to that STEM stuff. And I think that now more than ever before, if we pay attention to the hardest problems and the most urgent debates that are happening around technology, they're actually about the human side. Social justice, the impact of technologies on democratic practices and structures, institutions, how it's exacerbating or not disparities, how we're going to govern it, what should the policy be. We're pretty good at solving technical challenges, how to make a faster processor or a more powerful missile. Much more difficult for us to generate a list of successes when it comes to resolving the problems on the human side. How are we going to actually get equity and fairness with algorithmic systems? Okay? And so what is at least clearer now than ever before, even if not everyone will concede it, is that technology is not a reductively technical thing. It's actually a human problem. And if we do not have leadership from humanists in addressing these problems, then we're not only will we never solve them, we're going to end up with the world that we're going to create step by step, but we don't want to live in. I think we need a world that we do want to live in. And I think that one of the most important arguments and demonstrated exercises that can be made for not just inclusion of, but leadership from humanists today, broadly conceived, is on this problem of governing technology. And so it's something that we try to pay attention to and emphasize the scale and scope of some of these challenges as human issues that require humanistic expertise in leadership. And so I think if we think of those two things together, the history of the human tradition as a political kind of problem that shapes thinking about what should and should not count as humanities, and some of the most visceral and urgent contestations that are happening in our day and time, I have found those helpful to talk about in order to help people to understand how we're trying to interpret humanities here.
Well, that was inspiring in so many ways. Thank you, Sylvester. And it raises so many issues around the logical, appropriate subjects for the humanities, of ways to recast subjects, but also this question of how the humanities themselves have been traditionally inclusive and exclusive. And I wonder, before we go on, if any of you would like to respond to or add to anything Sylvester has in the, to keep those questions, those topics going.
I just want to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Averill. I'm actually a physician radiologist that asked to join this Obermann working group. I'm in a highly technical area of medicine in which I hear people say things like, why would we want to put, or I'm glad you're putting the poem at the end of the technology podcast, because I like to separate, when I'm seeking medical knowledge from, when I'm looking for some humanistic element or connection to the world. And I'm kind of in a different, I think, area than the rest of you, but I'm an educator and I'm at the University of Iowa. And I'm just really looking to how I can infuse or, blend, humanities into the technical education that I'm expected to deliver. So it's really exciting to hear about these projects and these ways of thinking about things. And it's just like, I'm really grateful for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Antoinette, I think you were about to leap in.
Well, I see also Erica's comment in the chat. I don't know if you all can see that. And of course, as Sylvester has been indicating, the humanities are really part of the problem. They're not exempt from any of the structures and histories of exclusion and erasure and violence. In fact, in many, many instances, they have been active contributors to those huge inequities and erasures. So I think historically about the humanities, I think that what the humanities are today, what they were before everyone was let into the room. Anne was reflecting on the charter that she had dug up for her Center for 21st Century Studies, and I'll let her say a little bit about that. But we have to keep moving, we have to keep growing, and we have to get out of the way if we're hidebound and looking backwards, because the future is here. And if you're not on the ship, I just say, move over, because there's a lot of people who are interested in rethinking this whole project.
I I also would add something, just sort of going back to the original question around sort of how do we kind of look toward these collaborations where maybe, you know, that first author system in the many shared authors from social science and science research is full to crack us out of that in the humanities and the arts as well as co-PI, PI, you know, this long list of collaborative structures. But I think one of the things we're seeing is maybe that the shorthand of reading those vita with those like, you know, highlight, my name is bolded when I'm, you know, where I am in the system of the co-authorship and the co-PI-ship and the partnership. That's just not enough anymore to let people understand the storying of the structures of research that we're participating in now, where people are tackling questions that are impossible for a single person to answer, and from a single perspective, that they have to be collaborative in a really complex and interesting way. And one of the things I did on a divisional committee where we encountered one of these situations where we couldn't understand the person's role in the project they were describing, was that we went back and asked for clarification in someone's promotional material to have the collaborative partners write a description of the collaboration from their perspective, so that we have more information. There's more storying around the structures of this to help guide the academic systems, how to read them and how to understand them better, because that shorthand doesn't work anymore. And the shorthand hid things in it. So to crack that open and to ask for more storying in that process.
Yeah.
Could I, Teresa, could I also ask you you had a question about this issue of collaboration and as related to faculty of color and students. And so I think that I just want to piggyback on that and Sylvester's comments too, because I think also a lot of, many times the work of faculty of color is related to their communities. And there is an intrinsic relationship between the work done with those communities that sometimes it's either neglected or blatantly ignored, or you know, it's undervalued in some ways. And also the relationship or the distance, the issue of distance and objectivity, right, between the scholars of color and their communities. And I think that's sometimes real struggle between trying to balance the distance and also the work done by the scholar in a particular community, and in particular their own communities, which are really demanding that that work is done. And so I'm curious also about thoughts from my colleagues here in terms of that tension that permeates also issues of promotion and tenure and even recruitment and retention. I mean, we see a number of cases, tenure cases, failed tenure cases that are precisely sometimes happen in that intersection between community and between in issues of ethnic studies versus, you know, the humanities. So I'm just curious about some thoughts from the other colleagues in the panel about that.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question, Javier. And I think we've all seen really, really unfortunate situations in which a scholar of color is hired because the faculty are excited about that person's potential to work with communities, only to run up to the moment of tenure and to be asked questions about very traditional forms of scholarship. Why aren't there more articles? Where is the book? Where's the evidence of the second book? And so it's one of, when diversity is valued at the front end of the process and there's really no context in which to make the work legible, and there's not clear value in the metric system for that kind of community work, we've just all seen where that can lead. I hope that there are changes in that respect. And I wonder in our own fields, in the humanities in particular, where, and at your centers, if we're really serious about supporting the careers of BIPOC faculty and students, what do you see that's working and where do we need to make changes? What could we do better in the humanities explicitly?
So that's a great question. I know there's some really amazing and relevant questions in the chat that we might engage with as well. And what you just raised, Teresa, is one of those, and it's about the support for faculty through that tenure and promotion process, given the range of work that happens. And a particular example where people are doing scholarship that is very publicly engaged and public facing, that is not typically valorized in the tenure and promotion process. Maybe there are important exceptions, but the exceptions that prove the rule. And so I think there have to be multiple strategies for this, of course. One of those is definitely changing the way we valorize projects. If we continue to focus only on one or two modes of output, publishing a book or publishing X number of articles, and as long as that remains the holy grail, the sacred criteria that we're going to use, we're never going to change this problem. And we should either own up to it and say we don't want to change it, or we have to evolve. And I think that would actually create more ways for people to do very important transformative work without having to feel like they were jeopardizing their careers. And so that's one thing. We have to change the criteria. We have to make sure that and that doesn't mean excluding books and articles. I'm not talking about a zero-sum game. I'm talking about widening the aperture so that we can valorize more things. And I also think that for faculty who are not in these tenure line positions, we need more robust support for those so that people are made to be included in the political community of the faculty. Often we use faculty to exclude people by definition who are not on tenure lines, for instance. They don't have offices, having longer contracts. And I'm not trying to make a case for not giving people tenure. I'm going to be very clear. I'm saying that in some instances, on average, US universities have half of their faculty who are not on tenure lines, 50% or more. And unless we're just going to magically wave a wand and make that disappear, which I don't think is going to happen overnight, in the meantime, let's give more support to those people so that the labor conditions that they face are actually more robust and humane. And I think that if we can make our talk about faculty support in terms of labor rights instead of tenure rights, I think that will help us to have more equitable conditions.
Thank you, Sylvester. And Antoinette, I think you wanted to jump in too.
Yeah, I wanted first to thank Sylvester for those wise words and to say that I think that I'm thinking increasingly this fall about who I want to see in my university in 2035 and how to imagine how to reshape what we have to invite those people in ways that speak to the total self and to care and repair, as Anne invoked in the beginning. And I think leaders in the university need to be asking BIPOC scholars what they want to need rather than assuming that we, particularly white people, know what that is. Because the solution isn't one size fits all. I mean, as Sylvester said, it's not either or. People may want to pursue the monograph. They may want to do work connected to their communities. They may, at different times in their lives and different times in their pathways. And we ought to make the relationship between the academy and the world porous so that people can move across those boundaries as befits their intellectual development, their ethical development, their family commitments, and all the rest. So developing mentoring programs that engage the whole person. And as Sylvester said here, I'm just echoing pathways to tenure and promotion that valorize a variety of ways of knowing and doing that don't have to be all bounded in one person at every single time, respecting the historical dynamism of each career and faculty development. I think it's important.
I also think that institutional accountability measures are very important. I'm in a university that is now Hispanic serving by virtue of our demographics. And we are really trying to define what serving means. Who are we serving? I mean, the Hispanic community has been serving the university for a long time where we are. And at the same time, you know, we're really proud and delighted that designation has been awarded to our institution. And yet we really want to make sure that this issue of servingness becomes a platform to be able to elevate also the work of people working with the communities. So I think these accountability mechanisms also need to exist to hold the institution accountable for not only being proud of the designation, but also exercising real support and extending the designation at many different levels of the institution, not just as a little concept or a little flag that you wave every September, you know, but an actual investment in this servingness, in these ways to really bridge with the community and more projects. So I think that that's also something we're trying to bring in terms of the research mission. In other words, you have an obligation here, but also you need to make the university accountable for really rewarding that service that is embedded into the fabric of the institution. Just a thought about mechanism.
Well, and linked to what all three of you have said, the next roundtable will be October 29th, and one of the participants in that roundtable is Christopher Long, who many of you have probably met because of his and his colleagues' amazing work on the Humane Metrics project for the Humane Metrics for the Humanities and Social Sciences. And we had them out here for a workshop. And part of what was fascinating is their philosophy is that you need to decide, you need to articulate the mission of your institution, whether it's your whole university or your center, and then your metrics should match the mission. The metrics should support the mission, which seems so obvious, and yet is almost completely not ever even a conversation that happens. And what all of you seem to be calling for is, how do we cultivate metrics, in this case in the humanities, that are articulated directly with mission, recognizing that this is probably a time we need to revisit our missions also. Anne, you were about to jump in, I think.
Well, that's exactly what I'm doing, and that's why I'm smiling so broadly. Antoinette mentioned that as I came into the Center for 21st Century Studies, probably should have gotten it before I took the job, but I found the charter from 1978, which is fascinating because it is predicated on this collaboration of scholars in the humanities across disciplines, actually articulate social science and arts and humanities in collaboration around the most pressing issues of our time. And when, from the 20th century, then for over its 50-year history into the 21st century, it articulated a faculty advisory council and of up to 9 people, and then grad representatives, and then up to 15 community council members who were mostly tasked with helping find some funds and maybe communication. And the first thing we're doing is collapsing those in this, my dear friend Liz Lerman, who always does this and bringing things from vertical to horizontal, to find a way to bring into meaningful engagement on advising all programming issues around the center from an integrated horizontal advisory council of university, I call it the trialogue, the university members, the national and international leaders, and the community leaders. There are leaders in all, emerging and established scholars, and leaders in all sides of that triangle, in a real dynamic interplay of ideally setting up trialogue. So and the metrics we're finding are trying to figure out inside of the organic structure of the research aims of those partnerships, what makes the most sense for the research trajectory for that entity itself, and holding that as a possible outcome for it, from team teaching to the establishment of cross-university community curriculum, to projects, to, you know, where is the metric inside that project itself. And I think as we move forward in the great work of the Humanities Without Walls program that I've been admiring from now at closer proximity, not quite from as far as before, is that these, as this time, this really dynamic time that we're in continues to evolve, we're going to have more and greater understanding in all of those areas of this work. It's just going to continue. So it's moving in the right direction.
These are all, you know, such inspiring comments, and we have about 10 more minutes. So I'm trying to attend to some of the questions in the chat. I really apologize, I can't get to all of them, but several people have asked about what the implications are for graduate education in the humanities based on what we've been saying. And I know that several of your centers have projects specifically for graduate students. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about, as we're imagining these really groundbreaking transformations of the academic humanities, as we're facing the job crisis in the humanities, how are you all thinking about how are you syncing up graduate education with these concerns?
I can start. We started a program of grad fellowships in the traditional funding for recruitment, funding for completion, but then we faced a series of financial challenges, and we discovered that a lot of students needed support for projects that were short-term, but also able to inspire a dissertation or a final project in the fine arts, for instance. And so we redesigned the funding model. We also created like a third space in which these fellows will really come in contact with people not from their disciplines. That was one of the things that we intentionally make sure that they were able to work not only with faculty, but also with librarians, with a number of people across campus that would really bring different perspectives, people from the archives and different opportunities for them to rethink or think again how the projects, which were in a way sort of on the margins of the department, were going to be successful, and who to work with outside the department. So those opportunities in our perspective were fruitful, and we're trying to really cement that approach. It's a challenge, but we still have those students that need that third space.
Mm-hmm. Antoinette, I know this is a part of the Humanities Without Walls that you brilliantly conceived, but also your interdisciplinary program that you're designing. I wonder if you'd like to say a little bit about implications.
Just say quickly, thank you. I put a little link in the chat to the HWW Career Diversity Workshop, which was conceived of for PhD students thinking about careers outside the academy. But as we're in our 6th or 7th iteration of this, has really come back again and again to graduate training and methodologies. Right now, we're about to launch a Mellon grant called Interseminars, which invites faculty and graduate students to co-design a year's worth of curriculum. And we haven't done it yet. We just actually picked the team today. I hope no one's watching. We haven't announced it yet, but I think that kind of, you know, the AAU and their project, graduate education is moving to more student-centered, co-designed curriculum for graduate students. Teresa, here, you should take the lead and talk about your wonderful work at Iowa. But I think all the ways in which we can take that collaborative co-designing partnership model into graduate education is really going to help us break the bounds of some of the hierarchies that we all live under. But Teresa, you really should talk about your program.
Well, so this is the Humanities for the Public Good, also generously funded by the Mellon Foundation, in which we're hoping to design a graduate, a PhD in essentially the applied humanities that would be a complement to our humanities programs, not a competition, because we think that such different people would be interested in a practice-based degree. But, you know, one of the real challenges, especially in budgetary tough times like now, is that our tendency in times of, when resources are shrinking, is to close the doors and settle into our departments and cling to what, desperately to what resources we have. And everything you all have said today supports my dream that collaboration that brings departments together and co-teaching across departments is offers such potential and matches so tightly with what the world is going to need, does need, and will need from us. So I one of my goals this year is to figure out how many individual faculty and grad students are interested in this initiative, but how to interest departments more collectively. And I will report in next year how that goes. Sylvester, did you want to add to the conversation?
Yes, I did. There were several comments about this humanities and post-human as well. I just wanted to say a little bit in response to that, since a few people were asking. I think that what we see happening in a lot of humanities scholarship is engagement critically with that as a important critical category, engaged in the work of many different people. Sylvia Winter is one, but there are lots of scholars whose work has been very helpful for contemporary scholarship examining this. So I had one person at our university who was wanting to meet with me about the Humanities Center to talk about the implications for environment, because they got the sense that all this talk about humanity was just anthropocentrism, which it has been and could be. That was not an unreasonable conclusion to draw. It just happens not to be how we're thinking about it here. But the gist, I think, is that there's not only a lot of room to engage with what's often articulated as post-humanism, but there are lots of practical reasons, urgent ones, that we've all experienced in some ways with climate change, for example. Someone was talking about interspecies studies. So most of our cells are not even human cells, they're bacterial cells. And a lot of the implications for research in healthcare, public health, have to be attended to that. But it's not just for the sake of humans, it's also for the sake of non-humans. So I would just want to emphasize that is certainly something that I don't see as in any way inherently being in conflict with humanistic scholarship. And as a practical matter, it has become a part of humanistic scholarship.
Thank you. And we have just about 5 more minutes. Despite world cataclysm, I do like to end an event on a high note. So I'll just ask, we've got a lot of center directors in the audience who share some of the same ambitions, dreams we do about finding ways to support new forms of humanities research to keep the humanities vital and central at our universities. I just wonder if we could end by each of you quickly noting what's one program that you're excited about at your center now that is part of really supporting the humanities going forward in a new or interesting way. I know that's hard to do quickly, but if you could try. And Javier, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's a challenge, but I would say that our Fronteridades program, it's now phase 2, and we're really trying to make sure that issues of heritage, indigeneity, and placemaking are part of the next chapter of the project. And also, this is based, as Antoinette was suggesting, in light also of the participation of the grad fellows. I mean, sometimes we are supposed to be the ones creating the excitement, but in my view, the students are creating the excitement. They're really trying to explore new ways and bring in new ideas. with no filter sometimes, and I think that's refreshing. So that's really in my an opportunity that we need to seek in a more intentional way. So that's what we are in terms of our Fronteridades project.
That's exciting. Antoinette?
Yes, I'm going to put this in the chat. We run and have been running an Odyssey project here at Illinois for many years, adult education for income eligible community members, which gives them a foundation in 4 key humanities subjects, and I think has the power to really change the world. And I know there are other Odyssey projects in the Midwest as well, but I think reminding ourselves of the value of teaching humanities courses in community and thereby transforming our appreciation for what they actually mean is really vital at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anne?
I have two quick things. One is this puzzle of how to do, like other centers, we have a collaborative program where we incentivize collaboratives to apply for collaborative projects. But I find, especially even in the pandemic and where we are in this moment, is that we need like this pre-collaborative phase where we can figure out without identifying or even bringing in the language of discipline or community university, just how to bring people together by what's just driving them or pulling them toward a topic or an issue, sort of regardless of where they identify as being. So how can we pull people together and get them to find each other? And we're doing that based on this survey that we did by identifying interest clusters, and then really trying, and the interest clusters we identified from our survey were health, environment, and democracy/citizenship, storying, playing, organizing, and decolonizing. And so all of our programming is going to be around pulling those things together in that trialogue form. And I have great hopes of that sort of fostering, igniting little, catalyzing, all those great words, gatherings of people that will just that will help do what I see as our mission, which is idea generation and connecting networks of people.
Thank you, Anne. And Sylvester?
Yes, so one thing that we've started doing is a summer internship program for our humanities students. We had our first one this summer. They helped us to develop some work to launch a poetry journal for incarcerated authors, but giving them some work experience that engages publicly with humanities is something that we've seen as a very exciting opportunity.
And we also, thanks to the generosity of Mellon, have had an internship program for grad students to work in community organizations that's gone on now for 3 years. And it's just been the most amazing experience to see students not only connect, thank you, Sylvester, not only connect with communities, but also understand their own graduate work in the humanities so differently and so much more powerfully once they've been out in the community in the way Antoinette was suggesting, and seeing that for all we talk about the crisis in humanities, out in communities, people so value what we bring. I am so grateful to all of you. I appreciate our audience members being here. We did record this so that the conversation will be available in a week or so, and we'll share it with our wonderful center directors. I feel so grateful to be part of this community and so inspired by the conversation. So thank you all, and I hope to see you on October 29th for our next What is Research Now conversation. Bye, y'all.